First up is One Battle After Another, and this is the latest film from Paul Thomas Anderson. And when it comes to his filmography, I'm kind of split into three camps. There's the films that I absolutely love. You know, there's Magnolia and There Will Be Blood, and I think Boogie Nights is a masterpiece, honestly. Then there are the films I really just cannot stand. The Master and Licorice Pizza fall into that category for me. And then there's the ones that I'm kind of agnostic towards, that I can respect the craftsmanship, but I don't feel super strongly one way or another. So Punch Drunk Love, Inherent Vice, and Phantom Thread. So I'm not someone who hears that PTA is making a film and immediately goes, oh my god, I know I'm gonna love this, which is fine. I like being surprised. So One Battle After Another takes place in basically America now. It is about a group of revolutionary left-wing resistance fighters known as the French 75. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Tiana Taylor, Regina Hall, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, and Chase Infinity. And Leonardo DiCaprio and Tiana Taylor play these two revolutionaries who kind of end up being a couple. They end up having a daughter, and eventually Leo has to go on the lam with the daughter. So this film, I think, is really well done. This film is also 40 minutes too long. It's 2 hours and 42 minutes. And I think the first 40 minutes is a different film that is a lot of the setup and a lot of kind of the revolutionary stuff. And it's well done, but I think we could have really condensed that. Like, I think he did a good job, actually, of establishing the characters in the first, I would say, 20 minutes even. And then we get into the latter 2/3 of the film, which is the kind of Leo on the run stuff. And then, you know, of course, gets sucked back into this world. And now his daughter's a part of it. Like, that part was, I don't want to say brilliant because I don't want to overhype this film, but I did find myself really engaged with it. However, because I'd already spent 40 minutes building to this point, I was a little tired by then. And then, you know, PTA loves his long sequences. He's very good at creating really tense, extended amounts of time, and that can be really draining for you as an audience member. So if you hadn't had so much setup, it might be I'm not going to say more pleasant experience because it is intentionally supposed to make you uncomfortable, but it might actually be more effective if you were not as tired, I would say, already at that point in it. You know, it would drive the point home because it would be so much more tense that you'd be like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening here. Performance-wise, I'm going to potentially blaspheme for a lot of people, much like saying, like, I don't love every single PTA film. I am not a huge Leo fan. I can acknowledge that he is a very good actor. Like, I'm not saying he's not a good actor. Some of it, I think, is the projects he picks, and some of it is, I think, you know, if he's not in the right role, he becomes very one note for me. However, I will say this was a right role for him. He not won me over, because again, there are Leo performances where I'm like, okay, yeah, he's very good in this. But this is one of the ones where I'm like, yeah, you knew exactly what you needed to do here. And there's a surprising amount of humor that he actually is able to infuse into this very kind of stressful situation that I think helps balance the film and keeps it going. I wasn't bored during the 2 hours and 40 minutes, but I did find myself checking my watch a couple times because, again, I think we spent so much time in the setup, and partially because we are basically living in a world that is effectively this world. You know, there's only maybe a few differences going on. It doesn't need that much time, and maybe this went into production before, you know, things like the ice raids and the camps had started and all that stuff, and so he couldn't have known that we would all already have a shorthand for it, unfortunately. But by the same token, this is why I don't love some of his films, is that I know he knows how to tell a more consolidated and condensed story, but he chooses not to, and I feel like sometimes it can get a little self-indulgent. This is not as guilty of this as some of the other projects of his, like The Master, I think really irked me, and I know there are plenty of people out there who absolutely love his entire filmography, and that's great. You're gonna love this film. For the people who are like me, who have mixed feelings when they hear PTA's name, or who don't know or care or not following along that closely, like who the director is, I think you're going to appreciate this film. It's not fun, per se. There are definitely humorous moments. It is very stressful and very effective at the stress. You know, it is a very relevant political commentary. It is hopefully maybe a little bit inspiring to some people. I know people are already hyping this up as the best film of the year, and I'm like, it is only September. We've still got a little bit of time to go. However, I will say it is one of the better films I have seen this year, and if it had been just a bit shorter, I would have been like, this is a 5 out of 5. But because I think it gets bloated in a lot of sections, I am going to give this a 4.7 out of 5. The next film I have is called All of You, and this is written by and stars Brett Goldstein from Ted Lasso and Shrinking. And I admittedly saw this film at TIFF in 2024, so it has been a hot minute since I've seen it. However, I really enjoyed this film. Is it a perfect film? Absolutely not. but I still enjoyed it. It is about two best friends played by Brett Goldstein and Imogen Poots, and it's in a world where there is a test that determines your soulmate, which is a concept we have seen done a cajillion times before. It's, I think most recently the most effective one is like the Black Mirror episode, which this feels a little Black Mirror-y in some senses, but I think it is slightly more optimistic. It's one of those unrequited friendship love stories, and again, we've seen this before. So what this really comes down to is the chemistry between the leads, and they sell it. You are rooting for them in spite of logic and circumstance and all this other stuff and poor decision making and all that sort of things. There's a good chance you're coming to this because it is Brett Goldstein or Imogen Poots, but likely Brett Goldstein. And it's the pipeline of the smoldering, soft on the inside, hard on the outside, Roy Kent-ness that is going to bring you to this film. And I think if that's why you're coming to this, you will be fulfilled. If you're coming to this because you're a fan of his stand-up comedy, this is less than the vibe. The film is a little bit saccharine at times, honestly, and it's a little bit melodramatic, but did I still enjoy watching it? And a love story is good when, even though your characters are making some pretty poor decisions, you are still rooting for them to get together. So ultimately, it's a breezy watch. It's not going to demand too much of you. You get to see the trials and tribulations of this romance unfold. And again, I think the cast, and obviously in the writing and directing to a degree, but had this been cast poorly, I talk about this a lot, chemistry is everything, especially in a romance film. And all of you knows that and knows that it can make up for a considerable amount, which might be a crutch and might not be fair. But as a pleasant viewing experience, it's there for you. I'm going to give this a 3.8 out of 5. The next film I have is called Eleanor the Great. This happens to be Scarlett Johansson's directorial debut, and it stars June Squibb, who plays I can't remember if she's an octogenarian or a nonagenarian, but either way, she's a pretty senior citizen who, unfortunately, her best friend / roomie passes away. So she moves in with her adult daughter in New York City and ends up befriending a 19-year-old, and the crux of the story is that she gets caught in a big lie that she, it perpetuates through the whole film, and it's sort of like getting more tangled up in it and all this stuff. And I want to be clear, I love June Squibb. I think she is a brilliant actress. Scarlett Johansson, much like Leo in One Battle After Another, she is someone who, as an actor, I'm like, I can acknowledge, objectively, you have some really great performances under your belt. I don't always love your performances or the projects you choose, so I'm not particularly someone who gravitates towards your stuff. Obviously, this is her first feature film as a director, so I can't speak to her in that capacity aside from this film, but I wasn't like, oh boy, Scarlett Johansson's directing a film. I found myself deeply upset at this film. And I talked about another film a couple weeks ago called Twinless, and having seen Eleanor the Great first and then seeing Twinless, I was like, Twinless is how you pull off somebody getting caught up in a lie and still keep the audience on their side. Eleanor the Great is an example of, one, I think the lie itself, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I think it is so egregious and no audience with a moral compass should be able to come back from it. And I know that the film tries to position reasons and give a good excuse as to why she tells this particular lie, but as someone who it was speaking towards something that is involved in my personal family history and a bunch of other people's personal family histories, I just was like, this is unforgivable for me. So bad taste in my mouth from that part already. And then the script just keeps doubling down and doubling down and doubling down into a point where it's already an almost impossible thing to come back from, but the way that the script handles it, there's no hope for it. I felt like this film is pretty emotionally manipulative on the most surface levels. And again, it's such a bummer because I think there's a movie somewhere in here about June Squibb's character, and she can still get caught in a lie, and having a relationship with somebody of such a different generation. Erin Kellyman plays the young woman she becomes friends with. Chiwetel Ejiofor is in this. Jessica Hecht. The stuff between June Squibb and Jessica Hecht, who plays her adult daughter, also really brilliant. So the fact that this film decided to take such a big swing with such a terrible lie, I was like, part of me wants to be like, oh, it's commendable to take a big swing. But part of me is like, where is your taste level? And it's not here in this film. There is a film in here that would have been good, and you could have even had it be a little spicy and all this stuff. But I don't even know if this originates with Scarlett Johansson. This originates with the script and the story for me. And aside from the fact that I love June Squibb, and I think anyone who loves June Squibb wants to support her, I could not in good conscience recommend this film to anyone. It has micro moments and set pieces that are well done, but the way the rest of the film wove everything together and then again would revert back to these like very shallow attempts at emotional manipulation, I found it very gauche. So this film, definitely not for me. Like I said, if you want to see a film about somebody who gets caught up in not a great lie either, but the story and the circumstances and the acting get everything out of it, please watch Twinlets. I'm going to give Eleanor the Great a 2.4 out of 5.